But now let's zoom out and adopt more of a bird's eye view of what's going on here, because these readings are not just about the nuts and bolts of CSR, they're also about CSR as a phenomenon undergoing some changes. As both of our required readings make clear, in recent history corporations have been treating their philanthropy more as investment than donation. They're really trying to integrate CSR more into their business model. And as I indicated earlier, even giving that doesn't obviously relate directly to the company's bottom line could be engineered intentionally in such a way because, in so doing, it actually does relate to the bottom line. That's the whole crafty PR approach that I mentioned before. Epstein's article suggests that one of the reasons for this change in CSR is that increasingly corporations are seeing themselves as global entities with global audiences. And that's true. No one can deny that corporations have become much more accessible over time, not just in terms of regulation, but also in terms of public awareness and branding. And this is especially pertinent to corporations that carry brands with some undeniably controversial baggage.
The defense budget is $750 billion. Profits went up last year well over 25%. When war becomes that profitable, you're going to see more of it.
There is a huge flow of cash into defense industry.
$66 billion for our men and women in uniform.
$100 million to upgrade 10 additional B-1 bombers.
You do have to follow the money.
It's the representative's duty to bring home the bacon.
God bless our contractors.
When I was researching Raytheon, I came across promotional videos for some of the weapons they produce. I found this one for an unmanned aerial vehicle known as the Killer Bee. Take a look at this animation demonstrating what the Killer Bee does.
Killer Bee Swarm Alpha has rendezvoused and is holding over COP.
Roger. BKB has a visual on 3 possible AIF cutting pavement on MSR Alaska. An unidentified object sitting on road adjacent activity. 2 personnel appear to have small arms.
Let's see if we can get them to disperse. Hit them with the MRAD. Order them to leave the area, leaving their weapons behind.
Leave the area. Leave your weapons behind.
Have PID. They're hostile.
Roger. You're cleared for engagement. Ensure your IP and attack azimuths do not endanger friendlies or innocents.
53 engaging targets. Targets destroyed.
Looks like we got them. KB-1 sees 2 AIF prone and immobile. Looks like they're wounded for sure. The third guy's running away without his weapon. Wow, looks like we just got a secondary after KB-2's passed. That's one less IED to worry about.
So these UAV operators come across insurgents who are clearly hostile, clearly armed, clearly setting up a roadside bomb. The operators give them ample warning to disperse. They make a point to watch out for innocent bystanders. And when they do finally launch an attack, which results in what appears to be a pretty substantial explosion, 2 of the insurgents are just wounded, and the third is left in good enough condition apparently to flee the scene, of course without his weapon. Now contrast that with this footage released by an organization known as WikiLeaks, of a series of attacks in Baghdad carried out by American forces in 2007, in which 2 Reuters journalists, along with several other people mistaken for combatants, were killed. I'll cut the footage at the most disturbing part, but I'm going to leave the audio. Also, it should be mentioned that in this incident there was no call to disperse, as we saw in the promotional animation.
You got about 4 Humvees right along this.
You're clear.
All right, firing.
Line here. When the state line, let me know when you gather.
We'll shoot. Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire.
Hey, Roger.
Keep shooting. Keep shooting.
Got a bunch of bodies laying there.
This video went viral online, and the release of the footage was covered by Reuters, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, the BBC, CNN, and other news outlets. This is the environment in which Raytheon and other defense contractors operate, and of course it's not their responsibility to explain the complexities that lead to such tragic accidents, and it's probably the case that accidents like this one are not so common. But at the same time, the scene from the Killer Bee promotional video is probably not so common either, and that's the point. Raytheon needs to maintain a certain amount of disassociation from the reality of what they produce in order to keep themselves viable in the eyes of an increasingly concerned audience. And this self-conscious orientation replicates across sectors. Here's Chevron for you.
That an oil company can practice and espouse conservation. Yes, we are an oil company, but right now we're also providing natural gas, solar, hydrogen, geothermal, because we live on this planet too. Humans have always reached for what seemed impossible, because it is then that we find a way. Tell us it can't be done. Then watch as we tap the greatest source of energy in the world. Ourselves. This is the power of human energy.
Welcome to the Human Network.
The human element. Nothing is more fundamental. Nothing more elemental.
Have you spotted the trend? Companies increasingly need to humanize themselves in their products and services because, as Epstein notes, being socially responsible is no longer optional. It's what you have to do just to get to the starting line with the newest generation of customers. That's actually a quote from a November 2004 analysis in Business Week, and there are many studies that bear this out, some of which are mentioned in our readings. Murray comments on how there's controversy over this on the left and on the right. On the left, he says that there's the concern that when businesses become a major source of funds for social service, cultural, and other organizations, it will force those organizations to adapt to its interests and inhibit them from serving the best interests of their clients. An additional critique coming from the left is that CSR is a diversionary tactic to distract from the real damage that corporations are causing. This is not an unusual viewpoint. One can read plenty of reports dismissing CSR as just smoke and mirrors, and that might be true, especially for some companies in certain industries. But as for the right, the criticism is more easily dismantled. Murray cites Milton Friedman, the famous libertarian economist who stated the business of business is business. In other words, corporations are accountable to their shareholders, and that's pretty much all. And that is a social good, maximizing wealth, contributing to the growth of the economy, improving technology and productivity. The business itself is the social value.
The bugle call of industry has summoned the client. Legions of craftsmen have joined to supply transportation for a nation of individuals.
But here's the thing. The equation changes when consumers expect corporations to behave in an at least seemingly socially responsible way. And indeed, there is data presented in our readings indicating that consumers are inclined to rearrange their buying patterns in accordance with this preference. As I've said, there is this understanding today that corporate responsibility is not as optional as people may think. CSR can, in fact, help to maximize profit. But the matter of ethical consumerism alone is relatively easy to deal with because if we focus only on ethical consumerism and other things taking place outside of the corporation, like regulatory standards, this allows us to conceive of a business as some kind of hermetically sealed entity that is purely consistent and reactionary. Even if its behavior changes, it's always in compliance with its objective, maximizing profit. If the consumers won't buy my product unless I give away money, I will give away money. If they don't care, I won't. It all depends on what I need to do in order to make a profit. But here's where it gets more complicated, because of course, a corporation is not entirely separate from the society that hosts it. The consumer who buys fair trade coffee and dolphin-safe tuna and sweatshop-free t-shirts often also sits in cubicles and boardrooms during the day. As Murray writes in his piece, one of the reasons managers are interested in CSR is that it tends to attract a more motivated workforce.
It's good to be working for a company with a soul. It's really great.
Again, as lots of reports indicate, the talent coming out of business schools these days is interested in contributing to society through the private sector. This is what Young and Burlingame mean when they say that the ethical altruistic model presumes a certain aloofness from the operational pressures of making profit. And this, along with other factors, but most obviously this, is the big cause of having all these different corporate personalities that Murray draws up. It's not about labeling this or that specific initiative as being an investment or a donation. What we should really be focusing on is not the projects, but the individuals that represent these two forces that Murray identifies as these two rationales, good for business and social responsibility. It's the personalities that count. For instance, the big reason for Ben & Jerry's socially responsible orientation is that their founders are basically hippies. That percolates down into the entire managerial structure of the organization. For example, they had their famous wage policy where no employee's rate of pay would exceed 7 times that of the salary paid to an entry-level employee. So back in the mid-90s, the CEO was making $150K. Something that radical doesn't just happen. It's because of the founders. It's because of the people in the important positions in the corporation that it behaves in such a way. And this is why it's important to consider the implications of this apparent surge of altruistic business grads who are looking to use the private sector as a vehicle not only for wealth generation, but also for good. The really fascinating issue in terms of organizational behavior is how the corporation is digesting this new workforce. How does this behavior play itself out within an institution that's really obligated to maximize profit? Do starry-eyed junior executives lose the giving orientation once they start dealing with kids and mortgages? Do they eventually learn on the job what capitalism demands of them and therefore curb their socially responsible impulses? Are managers losing sleep over this balancing act of recruiting motivated employees while keeping in check that potential inclination to squander profit on excessive charity? What's taking place? Now, I want to conclude with zooming out even more and just briefly going over what really underlies all of this, because there's a bigger issue here, and it's fitting that we started this class on philanthropy by addressing this topic. Remember, we're all in a program that focuses on philanthropy, and as we've discussed, and as has been documented, there are more and more nonprofit management university programs, more MBAs with social venture concentrations, and all these developments that point to what we read in Alan Buchanan's piece, Charity, Justice, and the Idea of Moral Progress. In this piece that we read at the beginning of the course, Buchanan talks about how society has developed morally. What's important is this idea that from the Iron Age to the Information Age, there has been this difficult, punctuated, fascinating struggle against dogmas and superstitions and arbitrary prejudices that has enabled us to reconceptualize the value of life, gradually converge on our understanding of morality, and get closer to that shared moral pinnacle. I want to make the case, in the spirit of Joseph Schumpeter, that this moral ascent is going to give rise to some big changes in how capitalism is practiced and how corporations are run. But let's be clear. What is capitalism? What is a corporation? Is it a skyscraper? Is it a cadre of employees? Is it a brand? Is it a stock quote? Well, these are accessories, but in order to really understand what a corporation is, we need to dig a bit deeper and get at the essence of the institution. We need to get more theoretical. These are components of an iterative heuristic optimization algorithm designed for the management of an inventory system. Basically, this is how to efficiently stock a warehouse and ship out to retailers. But bear in mind, this is just a dumb force. It operates within whatever boundaries we allow it to. The drive for efficiency and wealth operating in a warehouse today and a slave ship a few centuries ago is unchanging. The nature of the beast has not changed. Civilization is what has changed, as Buchanan discusses in that piece that we read. And that's its role, to struggle with the beast, to really question our impulses and instincts, and try to formulate principles for a better existence. So society has to ask itself, should this fall within the boundaries of individual ambition? How about this? And this. This is why we have ethical consumerism and regulation and stuff like that, because we as a society make decisions about what's kosher and what's no good. And what we do know is that technology is going to continue developing, and we're hopefully going to continue finding ways to enhance our lives and shrink the global village and come closer to each other. This is going to force the institutions built on our baser instincts to cope in new and interesting ways. Again, if we start pumping more and more socially conscious employees into the corporate system, what's going to happen? I think the kind of strategic, sophisticated CSR that we're seeing right now is the first stage of a coping mechanism that will continue to evolve as hopefully we do. But this is important. In order to understand corporate philanthropy as it exists today, and as it is changing, we really need to understand what a corporation is, in this day and age at least. We need to understand that even with interesting developments on the horizon, it still boils down to a clear and familiar bottom line.